Good afternoon. We're back talking about how we can foster startups and innovation in the energy industry. And it's a pleasure to have with me Daria Saharova in the studio. And I'll be introducing Daria in a second, but for this topic, we're talking about innovation. So according to the IEA World Energy Outlook, from today, 1.3 trillion US dollars clean energy investment would rise then to 2 trillion US dollars by 2030 in their stated policies scenario. But it would have to be above 4 trillion US dollars to enable the net zero emissions scenario. Today, for every $1 US spent globally on fossil fuels, there's 1.5 spent on clean energy technologies. By 2030, in the net zero emissions scenario, every US dollar spent on fossil fuels is outmatched by $5 US on clean energy supply, and another 4 on efficiency and end users. We've talked a lot about this over the last few days, how important clean energy investment is. So it's really nice to be able to focus in on it this for the next hour and talk about how limited investment will be a barrier to the energy transition. So how can we ensure that we have this uptick in clean energy investment flows? To talk about that, we have Christian Bogatu, who is the founder and CEO, an investment advisor, consultant, and much more. Alongside his work as co-founder of Kiwi.ki, a company providing digital entry systems, Christian is currently active as a venture partner at Eurasio Investment Manager and an investment advisor at SPRIN-D, the Bundesagentur für Sprunginnovation, or the Agency for Breakthrough Innovation, where he identifies and supports innovators with ideas that have the potential to make our lives better and more sustainable. Christian, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
And we have Jan Krueger, who's the managing director and partner at Munich's clean energy and climate tech investment holding, Pelion Green Future. He joined the company in March 2021 and oversees the group's investment strategy and growth activities. Before joining Pelion, he spent almost 4.5 years at McKinsey & Company in several positions, especially focusing on M&A and the energy and industrial sector. Jan, welcome to the panel.
Thanks for having me.
And of course, we have Daria Saharova, who builds on 20 years of experience in entrepreneurship and finance. She's an investor wanting to use European climate tech VC World Fund, founded in May 2021, to foster transformative technologies, climate tech startups, and entrepreneurs with enlightening ideas for the future. She's also co-founder of 1E9, the first digital think tank for future optimists and tech aficionados, and an expert advisor to the European Commission. Before taking over those responsibilities, she worked at different companies such as KPMG, Jefferies & Company, and Veto One, and founded her own companies. Welcome, Daria.
Thank you for having me here.
All right, so let's dive straight into the questions. Christian, can you tell us why innovation is so important for the energy industry?
Well, it's not just for the energy industry. I would say it's for the society super important, and that's like a no-brainer. I mean, look at what great breakthrough innovations have made and made possible. Look at the invention of the car, right? Now, would there be an Amazon without the car? Probably not. Like it doesn't relate immediately that a car can lead to such a giant in the tech industry, but there is definitely long-lasting wealth that is created if breakthrough innovation happens. And you can also see the opposite happening. So let's say 30, 40 years ago, most of breakthrough innovations happened in Europe. And recently that has changed. There's not much happening in Europe. And look where we are. We're kind of not playing on the forefront of economical strength. And that is probably also due to missing breakthrough innovation coming from Europe. And that's something that we identified as a major challenge in Germany and in Europe. And that's why the German government initiated SPRIN-D, which is the Federal Agency for Disruptive Innovation. And we have a €1 billion budget to invest into projects and companies and researchers and entrepreneurs who really have the vision and the technical capabilities to change the world and change whole industries. And it is important for the human race basically to move forward, right?
And can you tell me a little bit more, how would you define breakthrough innovation or disruptive innovation specifically?
That for me is very clear. It's something that has the potential to change whole value chains, to change whole industries or to create new industries. And for me, the important part is that it at least leads to improvement on one of the Sustainable Development Goals from the UN. Right? I mean, there's breakthrough innovation also happening, obviously, in the military space, but that's not something where we, with SPRIN-D, have the mandate to invest in, and me personally, neither. Right?
Mm-hmm. So. And Jan, can you tell me a bit about what sort of innovation we've seen so far in enabling the energy transition and what we need to focus on in the future?
I think that's a good question. I think sort of the wise innovations are necessary. Maybe to add to that quickly, I think, you know, the energy transition is a huge challenge, and obviously it's not happening fast enough. At least I believe that. But I think more importantly, we're moving from we're changing the infrastructure of the system in a way. We're moving from a very centralized world to a decentralized world, which means that we come up with a lot of new challenges, or we're faced with a lot of new challenges, whether that's companies or consumers or whatever. So I think there's two things that you've seen. There's the innovation on the technology side of things, where, you know, new software solutions and hardware solutions have actually sort of helped this, whether it's, you know, storage for electric cars. You can start with electric cars, whether it's sort of storage for at home, or whether it's managing like these different assets along the way. But there's also been this business model, you know, innovation that you've seen, and whether that's NPAL or Sonnen in Germany or other things, where you say, how do you roll out an existing technologies just in a kind of different business model that enables, you know, more consumers to actually use this. But I think the more we move into these decentralized systems, and I think one of the key terms is always the prosumer, right? You have sort of produce electricity, but also consume electricity. And the more decentralized assets we have, the more technology will be actually needed to manage all of that. And that might be a lot of software. I think the other end where we probably have to see innovation is, you know, it's still a big, you know, part of our energy system that we need to decarbonize. And with the current structure, we're not fast enough. So that means, you know, there needs to be technological innovation, whether that's, you know, the fusion stuff like Marble Fusion that we have in Germany, or whether that's just larger, you know, wind turbines to create more clean energy. I think there's both on the software and the hardware side of things, a lot of innovation is still necessary to be able to achieve the climate goals and net zero goals that we've set ourselves.
Daria, would you agree with the points that Jan and Christian have made?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. Good. So do you think, kind of switching the topic a little bit, we will see more clean tech IPOs, or are incumbents prepared to pay for innovation?
Well, that's a good question, because I think in the current market environments, at least for the next 12 to 18 months, I wouldn't expect a lot of IPOs to happen in whatever market, right? The markets went down. There's a cautiousness on the investor, especially on the retail investor side. So I would say in general, we are now entering like not the hype, like the hype of the market is over. In general, though, there is so much money which went into this space in the last 24 months, but also going to go to be flowing the space coming forward. So I think all this venture capital, at some point we'll need to get out, right? So yeah. At some point there's going to be a wave of exits. I think for the good funded companies, where you have kind of strong capital on the cap table, they'll just keep going on the private side. Some who are not as lucky, and I think that is more of the US European part, we probably will see some incumbents in a buying appetite, but I wouldn't again expect high multiples to happen then.
Okay, interesting. And I mean, obviously I talked about in the introduction how much how much investment we need in clean energy, and the numbers are just huge in by the end of the decade. Where will that money come from? Do we need to redirect it from somewhere else towards clean tech, clean energy, or kind of how can we ensure that we get enough money?
Look, I would say, at least for Europe, we have like massive amounts of capital, right? And if you look at Germany, there are 11 trillion euros lying on our bank accounts. I mean, 11 trillion euros, right? So I don't think that that's a question of the capital kind of capabilities we have. I think it's about redirecting the capital allocations into this space. And we've seen a little bit of the switch, but then mostly in the kind of light CapEx models. And then, we just talked about Empire and such and so on. But we need more capital going into the real deep tech startups, like Marvel, for example, if we're just going back to all the names which were said before. And I think we'll probably...
Which one? Like who? You mentioned an example, like I didn't...
I said, we've seen a lot of capital going into the kind of a CapEx light models like Empire.
Yeah.
And we'll need to see more capital going into deep tech startups like Marvel, because I think this
like Marvel, yes.
Just as an example. So we know that at least for Germany, to drop another number, we'll need 22 billion euros invest every year until 2030, according to DENA, which is the German agency for energy. And I think that we definitely will see more coming into this direction.
Yeah, interesting. And Christian, what role does regulation play in this?
That's a very interesting point. So my previous company with Fresh Energy, we helped consumers to save energy. And it was super tough to roll out this product, partly because too much regulation, and the other part was missing regulation. So too much regulation on the smart meter side that prevented actually rollout of smart meters till today, actually. And missing regulation, like if you look in the US, the software applications that help people save energy in their homes is mandated by law. And that supercharged the whole market for energy disaggregation and companies that would create benefits based on smart meter data. So I think regulation can play a super important role. If you look at now at energy saving companies, like for example, Double, and others in this market who can save up to 40% of energy in the PropTech space, in the building space, which accounts for about 12% of all CO2 emissions worldwide in the operations of these buildings. No one cared about it until a couple of years ago. And now that there's regulation and the tenants, the landlords have to pay also for the pollution that they cause, that sparked the market. So although I really don't like regulation in general, I think sometimes it's necessary to get the ball rolling.
Yeah, absolutely. And how can innovative solutions be heard amongst all of the noise? There's so many things out there. What separates successful innovators, products, solutions? Jan, do you want to start with that?
Yeah. I think that there's no difference between a clean tech company or energy company versus any other company on this. I think it depends on the impact. You need your solution or your product. You need to show that you create value and that you make a difference, and that you have I think a paying customer for this. And only then will you actually be heard among the noise. And I think the more traction you can show, the better. And I think there's lots of startup events around there that obviously help for the branding and the marketing. But at the end of the day, I think it really comes down on, is your solution, does it have impact, both from a, let's say, decarbonization point of view, but also from a financial point of view? Can you achieve something with that? Is there value add? Is that a long-term viable business model? Because sometimes when you talk about clean tech and climate tech, I think there's often too much of an angle of let's save the world, which is an important part, but at the end of the day, all of these solutions and companies and business models, they need to be viable in the long term, which is also a form of sustainability, right? As stupid as it sounds, you need to make money to be able to create a big company that actually has, fundamental impact. So I think it's really down to having a viable business model and making money along the way, so you can invest into further growth and to invest into scaling those companies.
Can I maybe add to that? Because I think for us, so at World Fund, we invest in transformative tech, which focuses on decarbonization solely, right? And we have created a metric which actually defines for us what is because it all comes back to the same question: what is disruptive, what is innovative, right? And we talk about climate performance potential. So every company we invest into, any technology has to have the potential of a saving of at least 100 megaton per year by 2040. 100 megaton a year is it's 1/8 of the German total emissions annually, or equals 20 million solar panels. So it's quite a high bar, right? And we say, and whatever we look into, we say like, okay, so is there a potential of at least 100 megaton savings by 2040, which we measure properly? And this for us means like real disruption, real transformation in context of decarbonization. And there are a lot of companies who do, who put hashtag clean tech. Clean tech, no one does that though. Clean tech doesn't have a good connotation anymore, but kind of hashtag climate tech, hashtag sustainability. There's ESG. It really drives me crazy how much names you will see out there. But in the end of the day, for us, if we talk about energy transition, we talk about decarbonization. If we talk about that, we need to invest more into transformative tech. And this is how we measure it with the CPP, climate performance potential.
Okay. And obviously measuring that is, go for it.
Sorry, I wanted to comment how like what separates successful companies. I think I have a very clear view. Maybe that's very simplified, but there's 3 components, right? Besides what Daria and Jan were saying around the business model, I think there's 3 components. There's technology, and we have really great technology in Germany, right? There's funding, and we have you guys as venture capital, and I work also for one. And then with SPRIN-D, I think funding is there. But the most important thing is execution, right? And the problem in Germany and in Europe is that the innovators, they think, not all of them, obviously there's exceptions, right? But generally, like the people I meet usually, they believe technology sells by itself. And that is so wrong. And I'm like, we have such a hard time convincing people, innovators, right? They have brilliant ideas, super brains. They can save the world. And then I ask them, so how do you want to commercialize? They say, commercialize? No, I want to research. Once I've done it, I just want to work on the next one. And that's such a big opportunity. And we need people out there who have the execution power, who really want to make a difference. And I would urge them to contact me, because I'm building a co-founder program within SPRIN-D, and I'm matching those super brains who really want to work on the cutting edge innovations, breakthrough innovations, and I want to match them with a co-founder who has the power and the willingness and the determination and the stamina to really see this through and make this into a unicorn. So if you guys listening and girls feel like you want to be part of this, reach out on LinkedIn or reach out to SPRIN-D, because we're building this co-founder program, because execution is the thing that distinguishes successful from not so successful, right? And I mean, yeah, sorry.
No, I think this is really right. It's like, this is clear. And I think what Jan also said, there is like, for a very long time, when you said like, I'm going to do something in the context of kind of sustainability or climate, you would absolutely automatically would be put in this, I want to save the world and money doesn't matter, right? So I think that is one. Then the second thing is that there are a lot of researchers who just don't think about anything else but building their product. But what we see, and I think what is really important for us as a VC, is that there is this second, third generation of German or European entrepreneurs who are who've been successful, exited their companies, and they actually are very aware of the climate catastrophe and they want to contribute. And I think this is exactly what Christian also says. And to have been able to put this both sides, and I think we have fantastic research in Europe. That is very powerful.
So do you think there is a challenge in bridging the kind of entrepreneurship with the skills and the engineering sort of side of it, of kind of matching that? And is that a big challenge that you see? And how can we kind of bridge that better?
Well, that is a challenge. Also, not every entrepreneur is a good manager when you scale the company, so there is there is the lab, there is then going to the market, there is the scaling. Not every single person, who is also build the tech is the one who is in the end still running the company, which is totally okay. Along the phases, it can change, your skills can change. But yeah, I think if you look at Europe, 1/3 of all leading research institutions are in Europe. You have 28% of all patents filed in this space are in Europe. But there is a really strong gap between the lab and then the market. So I think programs like Christian just mentioned, it's fantastic, but also kind of us as venture capitalists building bridges to research. For example, we have a scientific board where we work, with Fraunhofer and Max Planck and Project Drawdown, where we actually kind of try to get this gap closed. I think that's core. Yeah.
Jan, would you have anything to add to that, of kind of closing that gap?
No, I fully agree, but I also think that sort of the market is moving towards that, right? Like if you look at, I'm simplifying a little bit here, but like if you look at sort of this first wave of startups that you had, the first wave of innovation was a lot around e-commerce and delivery, etc. And now you're getting to a segment where like there's huge industrial sectors across Europe that need to be decarbonized, right? You've got the steel manufacturers, cement, all of the industrial manufacturing side, all of that needs to be decarbonized, and that will require very sophisticated solutions, technology, innovation, sometimes referred to as deep tech. And I think that's where, probably a lot of that research that's been done in these great institutions, can be matched with, more commercial side of things, because then there's a greater demand of this than there was 10 years ago, because there's a bigger urgency by the industrials and the market to say, I need something like this. So I'm actually going to invest in more of this. So I think that's where there's a big opportunity to match a lot of the science and, a lot of the hardcore engineering that has been done to also this innovation and market opportunity out there to say, let's match that. Let's create an opportunity. Let's create big companies, but those companies who have an impact on our system and how to decarbonize our system.
Absolutely. And it's not just finding the co-founder, it's also the willingness from the universities and research institutes to let these companies flourish in the market, because the IP transfer is still sometimes a nightmare in Germany. If the IP belongs still to the university or the research institute, it's sometimes really difficult for the founders to get that out of to get that into their startup. So that's something that we're also working on with SPRIN-D to help make this more smooth. Lots of challenges, but that's fun. That's why we're here, right?
Yeah, exactly.
IP transfer, I think, would be a topic for a complete separate panel, right?
And Daria, you mentioned before deep tech with the example of Marble. Is VC, or has VC historically been a little bit afraid of deep tech? And how important is it to play the long game with these sorts of things?
Yeah. Well, I think afraid is a strong word, right? So I think we're now, actually would disagree to Jan, we are in the third wave, because there was the first wave was actually around the 90s, at the end of the 90s, where Munich was the key spot for innovation. We had a lot of biotech, we had a lot of tech happening. The venture capital was born, so to say, in Germany, in Munich. So what happened then is that the bubble burst and there was no generational knowledge transfer to the next. And then there was like mid of the 2000s, where all the rocket internet came and the commerce wave and the internet, mobile internet wave came. So I think because this knowledge was not transferred, we lost this connect. But it still was happening, right? So there is, again, we have a fantastic ecosystem here. We have, top universities, top talent, industry. It's still been going on, but venture capital was not really focused on the space. So we have a very few investors who are familiar with deep tech. And I think there are like different category, like factors which play the role here. If you look at teams of VCs in Germany or in Europe, most teams, consist of former investment bankers, consultants. Now we had this one generation of entrepreneurs who became VCs, but they mostly came from the software market space, kind of consumer internet space. So you need the talent on the team to be able to understand tech, right? We don't like CapEx, right? It's all about recurring revenues. We learned that it's like, it's predictable. VCs just like really like to not take risks, right?
Yeah.
And then I think kind of in general, it's also, as you say, a long game. Technology takes a longer time. Like we learned that, okay, in the past, you could take a business model, you checked out a couple of channels which work, you put a lot of capital there, and then there is like, it's fast pacing, and then you have an exit. So I think whatever tech you're looking now at still have to be kind of maturing in the next decade, right? And I think what we're learning now, and if you see, especially in the climate tech, you have more scientists coming into the game, or at least, board members trying to to combine this investment knowledge with the science understanding. The technology has matured, right? And then there is like this really strong momentum, not only from the industry and from the market, but also for the environment, right? Because this is like the environment, like the climate change pace is not waiting for us to wait how the war in the Ukraine is going to turn out, or what's the inflation, high or low. Like that doesn't care, right? So I think the momentum is there, but and I believe because of this, and this is also our thesis, you can invest within the lifetime of a fund, which is usually 10 years, right? I do think that the pace is different, and you need more capital. Mm-hmm. Per company from the beginning, because you need to build the product, and there is again a huge gap. Mm-hmm.
So more risk. Yeah. And Jan, would you add anything to that?
No, I think I would agree that you probably need more capital, and you need the time alignment to be able to do that. And you need to look at the 10-year perspective, because a lot of these technologies might take a little bit longer. I think for me, there's a question of, and maybe that goes back to the regulatory point of view, is, for some of these things, can, states or like state-closed organizations take a bigger role? Marvel Fusion could have been something that, Germany could have invested as a state to say, because we believe, this is a technology that might change our industrial landscape. Why doesn't sort of the state invest like significantly in this? But I do think, from what you can see, like the timelines also, funds are changing. There's more funds that have a longer time frame that they're looking at, and the investments, and some of the structures are changing a little bit, so that you don't focus just on one stage anymore, but funds have different structures where they say they have a seed fund and then a growth fund, so they can actually continue to support companies for the longer term. But I do think in the space, and when you talk about different technologies, that's important, right? Look at hydrogen. I think it's one of those technologies that is going to have a huge impact on our decarbonization. There's been lots of talk, but most viable business models will take a couple of years to get there. I don't think I've seen much VC investment into hydrogen companies, despite there being a lot of opportunity, just because there's a huge technology risk, and it takes very long until that becomes
recently
viable.
You do have a lot of VC investment in hydrogen, and with Eurazeo, we invested probably 8 years ago in Sunfire already, when everyone was looking at us like, you guys are crazy, and now it's probably a lucky shot that it's now super successful. But I see there is more appetite from investors, from venture capital space, to invest into deep tech, which is really, really a good thing, but more to come, right? And in terms of in the topic of fusion, I think there's around 150 million euros going into fusion, not necessarily Marvel, but other projects. I'm not sure the exact numbers of funding, that is the research funding that goes into every company, but I think it's like big amounts of support from the government.
Yeah, but Christian,
right?
Christian, look, if you let's take fusion just as an example, right? Because there are different technologies out there you can compare with. But if you look in this space, like last year, Commonwealth Fusion gets like almost 2 billion in funding in the US. In the same time, we have I'm not sure actually, though it's public information, but a 2-digit million investment in Marvel coming, right? It's just the amount of capital still flowing into the deep tech across different stages in Europe is just so much smaller. The bets are so much smaller. And I think both private capital, the size of funds, they're different sources, right? There is no such a thing as one silver bullet. But I think on the state, like on the governmental side, I really wish to see more entrepreneurial capital at significant scale in Europe.
I fully agree.
Okay. And I'm quite interested in this question. With climate tech, considering the goals of becoming carbon neutral by 2050, does that put a timeline on successful climate tech startups? Jan, does that mean, you already have to have been started now? Will innovative solutions, will there always be a need for them even after that time?
I think so. I think the 2050 goal is a good anchor, right, in terms of emotional or mental goal in that sense. But I also think it's quite far away and quite abstract, right? If I'm a startup, if I founded a company, I need to think in much shorter cycles. If I would show my business plan to like a 30-year business plan to any investor, they'll probably be like, so are you surviving next year? What are you doing next year? So I think it's in very good sort of mental anchor in terms of goal, and let's aim for that. But I think we need to have impact quicker. And I also think we need to innovate quickly, because even if we reach net zero by 2050, it will, to retain that sustainable planet and to retain that infrastructure, we'll still need to constantly innovate across this, right? It can't just stop at 2050 at some point. So I think there's constant innovation needed, and I think we need to be much faster than 2050, but really try and push sort of until 2030 already with a lot of the impact and the things that we need to do to actually get there at some point.
Would you have anything to add there, Daria?
I totally agree. I mean, 2050 is, how people think. We can't change anything about that. It's just our psychology. 2050, whatever. It doesn't is it relevant for me? No. Why is it relevant for me in 2050? What do I know? What do I eat for dinner today? This is what I care for. And I think this is like on a personal level, we have to change the narrative. And I think we have to be faster. And we saw that in the last 2 years with COVID. If there is like a common enemy, we can do stuff on the government level, on the country level, on the continent level. I'm not saying that what we've done bad or good, right? But there is so much power to really make decisions and execute them. And I think we have to change the narrative from, it's nice to have, that it has to happen super fast. I totally agree with Jan on the entrepreneurial side, on the personal, on all the stakeholders side. And things are way, way too slow. And I think the narrative is also there is no planet B. I think the planet is going to be there in years from now, 100 years, 1,000 years. I think it's about the extinction of our kind. Someone will stay, but I think that's about are we going to be there by 2050? And
exactly.
Maybe
Exactly. It's not just do we reach net zero by 2050, but do we reach 2050 in our case? Yeah, absolutely.
And Christian, how do you think we can communicate that urgency and ensure that we have enough investment in the right technologies that will enable us to get there, survive that long?
I think so. It's difficult. What is enough, right? It's difficult to say that's sufficient. Right? What it's super easy to say is that it's not sufficient what we have today. So then there needs to be more investment, and that needs to be also channeled into the right direction. So one approach that we do with SPRIN-D is that we not just support projects that come to us, but we also think about what is the areas where really innovation is missing. For example, storage, long duration energy storage. how can you create a stable grid with renewable energies if you don't have, sorry, if you don't have the storage? And that's why we created a challenge called the Long Duration Energy Challenge, Energy Storage Challenge. And we can give up to 4 million to every company that applies for this challenge. And it's basically betting on the race and not just one horse. And I think that's a philosophy that is very different from venture capital, because usually you pick the best horse and you bet on that horse, right? But in that sense, as a state, we have the luxury to also bet on the whole race. And I think not just the luxury, but we have the duty. We have to do that, so that out of these 10 companies that we support in this field, Daria and Jan can pick the right ones and then inject much more capital later on. And I think that's the way to push even further and to have like this government and private sector partnership in fostering innovation.
That segues perfectly into my next question. Last year, companies spent 3 times as much as governments did in R&D in the clean tech space. Do you think that's enough? Is that a good balance, or should that be adjusted?
Actually, I don't know. I mean, I'm an entrepreneur myself. I'm not like a government person. I work with SPRIN-D, but I mean, I don't feel comfortable judging that. I just know that it's great that there's so much private investment into this space. But as I said, it's definitely not sufficient.
I think it depends on the pool, right? Like, so I think there's different. Daria said in the beginning, there's a lot of capital out there, right? But no, the investments need to be funneled into the right things. So I think the question is, what kind of investments do governments do versus what kind of investments does the private sector do? And I think that's the question, discussion that you can have, because I would think that sort of, the governments can take super high risk, very long-term kind of investments that, maybe a VC fund cannot do, because there's a certain time life of that fund that I need to act on. And then at some point, the private sector can take over, or you have different kind of formats. But I think, besides how much money you're actually going to put in there, the question is like, where you're going to put that money, or like who funnels sort of the money at which kind of stages of these companies or innovation cycles. So I think it's more about like targeted investments than just saying we need more. Right?
Mm-hmm. And how can we bring R&D, you talked about science before, how can we really kind of unite science and investment to make sure that the money is following the science? Yeah,
I think we kind of talked about it a little bit already. I think you need to build bridges, right? They are already kind of, at least the university, like we have fantastic universities, they have this technology transfer departments. I think we have to, freshen up and modernize that, or put the real incentives. I think what Christian said before, the way the licensing and IP transfer works today across different research institutes in Germany, it's like it really has to change. I think more like we need to have more engineers and scientists also on the private capital side who understand and speak the language. And I think we just need more success stories, right? So we have to see that this kind of investments work out, and there is the market for that, and there is an exit market for that, and that's and I think it's a kind of a self-reinforcement then. I hope.
Yeah. Someone said in a previous panel today that energy has never been sexier than it is right now. Do you think this space is becoming sexy, and do you think people want to get involved a little bit more? Are we seeing more success stories, as you just said?
Yeah. So for me as an investor, if someone says this is a sexy sector, then it's at the moment where I should not invest in that. To be honest, I don't want this, like, it shouldn't be about sexiness, right? Mm-hmm. I think we should be, our mandate is to invest in transformative technology which solves the biggest problems out there. With World Fund, this is the climate tech, right? And I think the sexiness comes from, when you actually build fantastic companies who then, for me as an investor, generate super returns, right? And I believe that the companies, and this is our thesis, right? I believe that the companies with the highest climate performance potential are going to be the most valuable in the markets in the future, right? So it's not profit or planet, it's one in one.
Yeah.
And I think this is sexy then, right? But just because it's hot, like oh, that would be a very like, bad joke, you know, that's because the climate is hot right now.
Good one.
I don't care about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's definitely in turmoil, the whole industry. And if you ask some of the let's say incumbents, right, they're really struggling. They're losing money every day. They're thinking of closing down retail business or business with like commercial customers, because it's just loss making, heavily loss making. So it's super tough at the same time. So, but I think it was Ayrton Senna, like the Formula One driver, who said you can't overtake 15 cars if the sun is shining, but you can if it's raining, right? And now it's definitely heavily raining. So lots of opportunities for companies and for researchers and entrepreneurs who have great ideas to solve the big challenges. And to your question, how to bring science and entrepreneurship more together, one like brilliant example for that is that I was blown away the last 3 days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, was the Falling Walls Summit. I don't know if you heard about the Falling Walls Summit, and if there was an audience now that I could ask the question, I would not be surprised if people are listening now, like probably 90% have not heard about it. And so did I had never heard about it. And everyone in my entrepreneurship bubble have no clue what it is. This morning I had lunch with really successful, breakfast with really successful entrepreneurs, and they were like, what? Never heard about it. It exists since 15 years and brings together the most brilliant scientists across the world in local contests. The winners come all to Berlin around the 9th of November always, because it's about breaking walls. And like the venture capital and like the startup community really doesn't know about it, and vice versa. So it's a bubble in the science space versus the bubble in the typical startup world. If you go to Web Summit with 40,000 people going there, or Slush or Bits and Pretzels or Noah or whatever, right? Toa, it's a completely different world. And there's an opportunity to kind of bring these much closer together. And I think the Falling Walls Foundation is doing a great job in that, but there's still a lot to do. Right?
Yeah. Maybe to add to that point about energy being sexy right now, I think what probably the only positive thing out of the last 6 months in the situation in Ukraine was that energy became more in the forefront of people. People talk about energy, they talk about the electricity prices, they talk about how can we decarbonize, how we can get more energy efficient. So I think you've moved away from, we have to do this energy transition to, it's also a topic of security. It's also a topic of wealth. If I don't have a cheap energy system, and the renewable energy system is a cheap energy system, that will impact my industrial growth. That will impact my wealth as a society, as a country, probably an industrial setup at some point. So it has moved very much in the forefront of people's minds, which I think hopefully then leads to more and more people thinking about, hey, I might start a business in this sector, or I might try and find a career in this sector. And that hopefully then leads to innovation. So I think that was one of the positive things out of this, to say maybe it's been sort of, might be sexy or might be hard, depending on how you want to call it, but sort of it's been something where more people are interested in talking about, and that normally leads to more people sort of spending time on this topic and then trying to innovate or build something around it or finding a career in that. And I think that would be an exciting sort of outcome of this.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely been a topic that's come up over the last few days as well. And when we're talking about investment, obviously it's important to try and have a widespread, inclusive investment in clean tech across Europe. Is that important, firstly, Daria, and how can we ensure that?
Well, I think if we talk about, the climate crisis, it's a global problem. It doesn't matter what we do in Germany; it will not solve it, right? So it is a global challenge. So even us, when we look, it's potential investments, we always say like, we have this very strong belief that we have fantastic tech in Europe, which has to be, scale, but it always has to have this global applicability. I think it's of course about inclusion, but it's also about, we will not come to net zero or below net zero or whatever goal we have if it's going to be like partial countries who are fantastic, doing everything we talked about, and then there's huge regions just because they're not a part of whatever group of states, and there is nothing happening. That's why I think we have to for this one, it's a truly global one, and it's hard.
I agree with the global aspect, but I disagree when you said, I think it really matters what we do in Germany, and it matters what every single person is doing. Even though I can think like, well, everyone is flying with an airplane, I'll also fly. Like, because we have this mentality that we say, okay, this is unfair and I'm just going to do it. But it actually is the case that it matters what every single person is doing. And it matters a lot what we do in Germany, because if we succeed with business models that really are sustainable and help the journey towards net zero, and we make money with it, which is the perfect of all worlds, and it's possible, and it's already being done, then I think that's a great example for the rest of the world. Right?
Yeah, I agree with that, but then it should stop with us having the tech. Then we have to, share it with us. Like, it doesn't.
You have to think global, right? And act global. Then you're absolutely right.
And there's an impact and sort of a business opportunity point of view. This is, I have a technology that's great that was working in Germany. I can take it to all of the other countries. It's great for impact. It's great sort of for my business too. But I think I would agree with Daria. Our systems are so connected that you can't find island solutions in that sense. And when you bring it back to the energy system, a lot of sort of, I think our electricity prices and why they've been so high were connected to French nuclear plants being down. Right, so it's not that we can find a solution in Germany. It needs to also be something that works for France. So I do think it's sort of a global and exclusive problem. But with all things, we can't wait for the group to do. I think there's sort of always countries or sort of organizations that need to move forward, and there's a business opportunity for that. But there's also a need for this, because if we look at net zero, I don't think all countries will hit net zero at 2050, but there will be countries that will overcompensate for others probably in terms of decarbonization. And I think that's where it becomes a inclusive kind of approach that's necessary.
And when we're talking about truly inclusive, what about developing countries where you may not make money if you kind of invest in those countries, or if you scale solutions to those countries, but do we have to go there? We need clean solutions everywhere.
Yes.
Yeah.
For me, and that's one of the reasons why we're called World Fund.
Yeah.
Because this is the global thing. And I think I agree with, yes, it matters what we do in Germany. If we, manage to do well, it's also kind of a positive signal. Then there are that like options, but I think we have to think inclusive.
Everyone else agrees?
Yeah, fully agree. I think it's a matter of execution at the end, but we have to, right? And whether you find different pricing for your product depending on where you are, but it's a matter of sort of getting everybody on board.
Mm-hmm. And we're coming towards the end of the session, so I'd like to ask you all, what do you think, like in terms of innovation, particularly in energy tech or clean tech, what do you see as the most important priority by the end of this decade? Daria?
Priority in terms of which technology I would prioritize?
Yeah, or what problems should we solve? Should we overcome issues of regulation, or should we invest in a particular technology, or can take it in whichever direction you'd want?
Yeah, which is good. So I think we have to invest massively now, as fast as possible, try and error in, deep tech technologies like AI, quantum, space, food. I think we really have to kind of understand that in this case, you have to include the regulator and actually break the system. I think that like it's also about the system change, right? It's another topic you can talk probably for hours, but I think that's so interconnected because so for me, I think if I would wish for something to happen until 2030, I think we really have to get on this together. And it sounds very pathetic, but I mean, you can't invest in food tech if there is such a strong lobby supported by the regulator, which makes this whole system actually exist. But you will not break that as a single startup, whatever money you get to that. So I think we need all the stakeholders in one boat, set up incentive systems, which are really kind of working in the way that we go towards change as fast as possible. I think time is ticking. It's really very late. Yeah.
So working together rather than butting heads and creating barriers. Jan, what about you?
So I'm optimistic on this one. I think there's, we've got the know-how, we've got the optimism, we've got the entrepreneurial mindsets. I think the capital is also there. I think you need to reduce regulatory barriers or take out complexity, and whether it's fastening approval processes for renewable plants or other things. I think you need to sort of take out regulatory barriers because that will slow us down, and that's not going to help us get there in 2030. I think for all else, we've got it. We just need to execute them.
Christian?
So I think we do need a couple of moonshots, like invest heavily in fusion. Sorry, my little kid is here, a little loud. So we need those moonshots like fusion, like photocatalysis, for example, where you get hydrogen directly from basically sunlight and water, things like that. And then we need definitely long duration energy storage, because theoretically we already have what it takes to do the energy transition to net zero in most cases, I would say. So with wind and solar, what is already there, we could already solve most of the problems if we had the long duration energy storage. So we need to invest also in, and that's probably deregulation, like making it more easily possible to install solar and to install large wind parks. I mean, it's also about installation capacity. For example, if you look at the heating sector, right, there's the goal of 6 million heat pumps. And how do we install them? Who's going to install them? We don't have the installers in Germany who do that. So we need to massively invest in installation capacity. And think much bigger than what we do today. Think much bigger than what we do today. Today we think about 500,000 heat pumps to install them per year. But that's not enough. Like the German mentality is like, oh, okay, 500,000 heat pumps, that's super difficult, or never possible. We need lots of subsidies from government. Chinese companies would be different. They would say, okay, what's the world market for heat pumps? Oh, it's like, I don't know the number, right? Is it like 30 million heat pumps per year? Okay, I want to have like half of that with my company, so I'm going to build a company and the processes and the installation capacity to actually do that. So the mindset needs to change, I think, as well. But yeah, probably more difficult than funding fusion or coming up with a fusion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a very interesting point, and I think it goes back to measuring success of what you were talking about, how you identify what companies that you would invest in. And I think it's really difficult for countries as well to track their success, know if they're on the right track. And I think a lot of the issues that we've talked about in this session of kind of marrying science and investment and regulation and investment and everything will help us overcome a lot of these challenges that we've talked about. Any final words from anyone before we close off, or gotten it all out on the table?
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe just a very short one, because we talk about how everything is, too late and hard. And I think we're still there. the chances are still there to make a change. And I think, as I said, I think every single one, but then all of the different stakeholders will have to, push together. And I'm still positive on that happening.
Yeah, thanks. Christian, you wanted to add something?
I just wanted to reiterate, if you feel like you're the execution machine to make a real impact on the world, get in touch, and I can put you in touch with the researchers that come up with these great technologies.
Thanks. Well, unfortunately, that's all we have time for. But thank you so much for joining the discussion. Lots of interesting points, and yeah, I'm positive for the future as well after that chat. So thanks again, and we'll be back in 2 minutes talking about the search for energy talent.
Thank you.